Hey everyone, so this is my review of Manifest, Season 1, Episode 3 called Turbulence. And essentially what this episode is about is that Ben and Michaela look into this murder that might have a connection to Flight 828. And this was a really interesting and great episode that had a lot of good sort of storyline plots to it, but then the whole resolution at the end was a little weak to me, and that kind of bugged me. Where, this whole murder of this woman who was on the plane, who was probably the most outspoken person so far, she gets killed, as we saw in the last episode, and the actual steps of who gets blamed for the murder and who actually committed the murder and sort of all the suspects in between was the weird part to me with how it all eventually played out and who was actually the killer. Where, the main suspect guy, who was this creepy guy who was stalking outside her house and stuff, is framed for it, but he turns out that he's just a really crazy follower who actually ran in to try and help her and just sort of got caught in the moment and got caught with blood all over him and stuff like that. So he gets framed, and then at some point they blame her husband, who is a bit of a weirdo. And his sort of ideas and stuff don't match up, but the fact that he has a super credible alibi sort of puts him out of the running. And then the maid actually being the killer is the part that really bugged me, because of the fact that, yes, they kind of set it up early on that that could be a possibility if you really look into it, but still, it just, her reasoning and stuff felt really rushed and all that, where she is sort of like a jilted lover for the fact of this woman coming back after being dead for 5 years, and her feeling betrayed because of the fact that she had been there for this woman's husband for all those 5 years and had sort of grown a relationship with him and stuff. And then all of a sudden this other woman comes back and that's all just thrown out the window. So I get her reasoning behind it, but it just felt weird. Especially for the fact that really bugged me is that they teased the shadow person in the last episode, and then they didn't deliver anything on the shadow person, really. Where it's like, I'm looking forward to knowing more about this shadow person and stuff. And it would have been interesting if he is like going around and sort of killing anyone who might slowly be discovering new information and stuff like that on him. So that bugged me that it turned out that it wasn't actually the shadow person at all. But I did really enjoy it by the end of this episode that they did make the discovery that there was another undocumented person on board the plane. So I'm very interested to see how that's going to go into more detail by the next episode, and like how they're going to slowly figure out who that person is, because I feel like they're the shadow person that Cal and stuff are seeing. And then the parts with Michaela and her sort of finally dealing with all the stress and stuff that she's been able to put off for 5 years was interesting, with her still being very terrified to get behind the wheel of the car and stuff like that, so that sort of explains why she's been driven everywhere. But then circumstances arise where she actually has to drive to go and save someone else, and how she finally works through and gets to that was interesting. And I did really like how they finally did show a scene sort of setting up what actually happened that caused the car crash where her best friend died, and like how all that led up where Michaela essentially had no choice but to drive, even though yes, she was a little drunk, but her friend was way drunker and wasn't even giving Michaela the option to like call an Uber or something, that she was either going to let Michaela drive or she was going to drive, and Michaela knew that it was by far safer if she drove than it was if her friend did. So that was interesting to finally see like that sort of side of the story that eventually led up to the car crash and her friend's murder. Then everything with Ben and the family was interesting, with Ben dealing with more of the people that Grace has come to know as friends and stuff over the years that sort of helped her get through the loss of her husband and child and helped her to raise Olive and stuff like that was interesting to see how that was dealt with, and then the sort of regrowing of the dynamic between Cal and Olive was interesting, with them trying to deal with the gap in their sort of age now and how they are no longer twins but still are twins and stuff like that. And Cal dealing with the fact that Olive is now dating his old best friend. And then the ending discovery made by Shawnee by the end of this episode was interesting, and I'm very curious to see more about that in the future, where she discovered that several, if not all, the people that were on board the plane show these residual signs that they died for a while and then were brought back to life. And so they're very interested to know more about that, but they can't really gain access to more information because of the fact that the secret investigative service that's looking into the flight has everything under lockdown. So they have this information now about what possibly happened to them, and they don't know how to further prove it. And I'm very interested to see more about that in the future and how that actually plays into what really happened, where if they died, like how and how did they eventually come back. And then just overall, this was a really interesting episode that was so entertaining to watch and see, and I'm very curious to see what the next episode will bring, with more information on the flight attendant who was acting odd apparently by the flight, and then more information on this stowaway person. And that just looks like a really interesting episode that I'm so excited to see. So yeah, that was my review of Manifest, Season 1, Episode 3, called Turbulence. So yeah,